Is Trump allowed to do this? Do these troops have the power to make arrests? What should we be pressuring our lawmakers to do in this moment? What is there to do? As Trump deploys military troops in DC and threatens other cities across the nation, our audience understandably had a few questions that they wanted to ask the ACLU experts.
That sounds good.
First question is Trump allowed to do this in DC?
What President Trump did in DC is invoke emergency as if it were a blank check to bypass critically important laws and checks and balances. So he has abused his emergency powers. What's happening in DC is an escalation of an abuse that started in LA. He claimed falsely that he needed to call out the National Guard and attempt to take over the DC police in order to address crime and unhoused people. And that is just absolutely wrong.
You mentioned LA. Can you speak on what his powers are to do something similar like this in other cities, in states that have statehood recognized?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Hannah, what you're raising is a really important point, because the president can claim authorities in DC that he would not be able to claim in other cities and states around the country. And I can just talk about that a little bit, right? So he took over the National Guard in DC because DC is not a state, does not have the protections that states have. And so the president, in essence, can act like the governor of the state in ways that he cannot, where states have actual governors who are actually objecting to what he's doing, which is what happened in California, right? So the president there, again, another false claim of need to take extreme measures. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. This country, one of our foundational principles is that the military should not be policing civilians. And that is important for so many, many reasons, including, of all, our individual rights and liberties, right? We've got, the military quite simply isn't trained to do law enforcement type policing or policing sort of protest or anything like that. So one common thread between DC and LA and anywhere else the president claims he needs to go in is that he's putting not only our rights in jeopardy, but he's putting troops at legal and ethical risk.
So where states do have a governor,
Mm-hmm.
are you saying that the governor can object to that kind of federal power being imposed on their state?
Yeah, and let's talk about that as a very concrete example and take California as an example, right? So what the president did in California is he invoked a very rarely used statute. It's never been used in this particular way to what's called federalize the California National Guard, meaning bringing them into federal control. And remember what he did it for. Back on June 7th, people in LA were protesting cruel immigration raids that were picking up their neighbors and were speaking up. And the president used that as an excuse to federalize the California National Guard. And the governor of California and state and local officials, to their credit, did exactly the right thing. So the governor sued because the governor has the ability, we call it standing in court, to say, you took over my troops over my objection, and you didn't have authority to do that under the statute that you're claiming, right? And that's playing out in the courts. But also super important was that state and local police, state and local officials, top to bottom, were essentially saying, we've got this. We can handle this. Whatever might be happening with respect to unrest, and critically, the protests were almost entirely peaceful, we can absolutely address. So that is important because that is a statutory reason that the president didn't have a basis to claim his fake emergency and come in. And so I think one of the things that we're going to be looking for in other cities is for if the president follows through on his threats to send military troops and federal agents in masks and law enforcement agents, we're going to be looking to governors, state and local officials to be objecting. We're going to be wanting to monitor exactly what is going on. And we're going to want to make sure that we are speaking up very loudly and doing everything that we can to document and prevent abuses.
So for people in those states, other than DC, those cities, one question that we've got a lot is, do these troops, these federal troops, have the power to make arrests of citizens in those states?
That is such a great question. It also gives me the chance to talk about a really important statute, which is called the Posse Comitatus Act. And people will hear about the Posse Comitatus Act and what does it mean? And what it is it is the expression of something that is held true since the founders' time, right? That military doesn't police civilians, because it makes it a crime for the military to engage in what's called direct law enforcement. So the kinds of things that you might think about police doing, right? Interrogation, arrest, detention, so long as the military is acting in a certain federal capacity, right? So when you think about California, it would have been a crime for the federalized California National Guard to engage in direct policing like arrests and detention. And even outside of California, so far, the military has so far been careful to say that we are not arresting people. And if we hold people, it is to turn them over to civilian law enforcement. Now, that's something that we're all watching very, very carefully to see if that's abused. It's one of the things that the state of California has said, that no matter what you're saying, that's not actually what's happening when federal troops are accompanying immigration agents in different parts of the states to conduct raids. So that's playing out in court right now in this critically important case. But the bottom line is that when the National Guard troops or active duty military are, when they're acting in a federal capacity under federal command and control under the president, generally speaking, they may not carry out arrests or detain people or interrogate people. I do have to say the actions that the president is taking are a potential recipe for disaster. And again, going back to legal and ethical jeopardy for the troops and for the civil rights and civil liberties of our community. But everyone should be absolutely clear that no matter what uniform they wear, or whether they are troops or federal agents, all of these government officials are bound by the Constitution and federal laws, and there is no exception to that. So all of those laws apply to protect us.
So you mentioned the case in LA. We actually got a few questions about that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most common ones was, how impactful will the court decision in that LA case be?
I think it'll be very impactful. This is the first case to truly test all of the things that the president had been threatening before he even became president, right? Which is that he was going to deploy the military against the American people for various different reasons, pick a different reason each time, but often circling around crime or suppression of protest or immigration. And so the California case is testing and objecting to the president's unilateral claim of authority to federalize the National Guard and deploy that. There are aspects of it that are currently before the appellate court in California, which are whether the president actually had this authority. But what's still playing out is that, did the actions of the troops, for example, violate the Posse Comitatus Act, the way that I had talked about before? And so the decisions in the case, the court's decisions testing this presidential assertion of authority, will be super important. But the case has already been important because important information has come out in testimony. So, for example, one of the things that we learned was, do you remember that park when the troops were out there and the federal law enforcement agencies, and people were just like, what are you doing?
Yes, definitely.
A question one may ask about all of these deployments. It came out that the military folks had themselves objected and said, there is no need for, whatever you might think, there is no need for military presence here, and were overruled. So in a lot of these instances, we come to see and find out that folks within the military, they want to do the right thing, right? Like, people generally don't want to start out policing their neighbors and, doing something that is so intrinsically not what they have been taught, not what has ever been ingrained in them, which is that you don't turn on the population of your own country. And so if I can, Hannah, just a little bit, like, some of the worst abuses that have happened in LA and our Southern California affiliate, those incredible people and their partners actually sued on this. Some of the worst abuses, protest and immigration raid-wise, they're being committed by federal civilian law enforcement agencies and not so far by the troops. So very important as it is to focus on what's happening with military deployment, and that's something that we're doing all the time and have been for months now, and preparing, thinking about what we do. It's also critically important to remember that federal civilian agencies have already started violating people's rights in protest and immigration-related situations in a way that is really disturbingly reminiscent of the first Trump administration when that happened in DC and Oregon and elsewhere. And so those are some of the things that we're really looking out at and looking for and monitoring and seeking to prevent.
So if people are in the street and they are stopped by federal law enforcement, what rights do they have? What should they know?
Well, I think the number one piece of advice I would start with is remain calm and never physically resist or obstruct law enforcement, right? Keep your hands visible. I think if you're stopped, you can ask if you are free to leave at any point in the interaction, and just ask that, am I free to go? And if the answer is yes, then you can walk away. If the answer is no, then you have been stopped and must remain where you are until you've been told you're free to go. Now, there are various different situations that can happen, especially if you've got a number of, troops and alphabet soup federal agencies in play. That's why it's also just super important to know your rights. And I would really encourage people to look at our Know Your Rights materials in order to just make sure that they are taking all of those things into account if their cities are being treated the way that DC is right now.
For the average citizen, for the average person, what is there to do in these, either whether it comes to your city, whether the National Guard is deployed down the street from you, or, it's your cousins a few states away? What is there to do for the average person?
There are things that absolutely regular people can and should be doing. If you are in one of the cities in which these abuses are happening, well, first of all, our Know Your Rights materials, but also there are ways to monitor, be careful about it, but and document abuses or keep notes of them so that you can raise it when you're talking to a lawyer. Participate in protests. One of the things that has been so incredibly inspiring for me to hear, this is like when you're proud of your colleagues and other folks, is our colleagues have done these incredible trainings for people about how to be at protests and be helping to monitor protests. And so when I feel hopeless, and to be honest, sometimes, we're all human, I just think about all of these many, many acts that together are about how resilient we are in civil society in this country, because that's what's going to be needed to keep us going.
So I hear what you're saying. There's a lot that people can do as individual people. Can you speak on a little bit, what should our lawmakers be doing? What should we be pressuring our lawmakers to do in this moment?
So one of the things that we've been hearing is rightly so problematic, is that the federal agents that I was talking about that have been, in these places committing abuses, they're wearing masks. Now, there is actually legislation on the books that requires military troops to be identified whenever they are out there. So the military can't be unidentified, and the federal agents shouldn't be either. So there's legislation that would require federal agents to wear identity tags and be identified and not wear ski masks or masks for non-medical reasons. So supporting that, letting your members of Congress know that there are concrete measures that can be taken. Another is, I think about this especially when the president comes up with a new city to threaten to send troops and federal agents into, is keep up the pressure on your state and local officials to resist and reject, help ensure that all of the policing that they are doing is constitutional. There is absolutely no need to bring in federal agents. And when they're doing the right thing, let them know, because they are under a lot of pressure as well. And so we want to both encourage state and local officials to speak out, say no, and do what, for example, I was so heartened to see the governor of Illinois say and do, which is, if there is this baseless, fake emergency, abuse of power, deployment of troops into Illinois, the governor said that they would sue, and rightly so. That is understandable and good for them. We've got so many supporters and people around the country who live in states where governors are sending troops to DC, right? Ohio, West Virginia, South Carolina, and others. Let your rejection of that move be known as well to your state and local officials. Do not let this go unobjected to. Speak out. It's so critically important. It's one of the most important rights we have.
Yeah, I'm from Ohio, and I sure as hell let Governor DeWine know how I feel about sending Ohio troops to DC.
Go, Hina.
So
I love that.
I'm not letting that happen without saying something about it. So thank you so much. So my final question that we have, this is one of the more prevalent questions we got, which is, I feel hopeless. Is there hope left? I know you do have hope because you show up to work every single day. Everyone at the ACLU is showing up every single day, putting in the hours, not backing down. And that wouldn't be the case if people didn't have hope. So why do you have hope? Why do you keep fighting? Why should others have hope?
It can be overwhelming to have all of the bad news and see, terrible things happen and know human suffering. And that's something that we certainly see in all of the work that we do. And it is a daily thing to think through. How do we keep it going? I get hope from my colleagues and friends. I get hope from the actions that people get to take. I get hope from, I'm really lucky. Like, it is amazing to get to come to work here every day. But you know what? Honestly, one of the things that gives me hope is something that happened during the racial justice protests. And this was God bless organizers around this. And I was at one of the protests, and, we were doing various slogan chants and so on. And one of the things that we did was, I looked at a stranger, a young woman, and she looked back at me, and we said to each other, I will love and protect you. And that, to a stranger, that to me is just part of what we can do for each other. And it may sound really hokey, but that is something I think about when I need it.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Hina, for taking the time to answer the audience's questions, my questions. I'm positive we will be back with more. And thank you for the work you do.
Oh, thank you, Hina. And I'll look forward to next time.